Do you know what? I had one of those moments after worship and Gareth led us in communion where I was like, my soul is deeply peaceful. Oh no, I've got to preach. And then I thought, I wonder whether I could lie down and preach this morning. You just sit there. Sometimes you shut your eyes and you're just like, oh, yes, Lord. So I feel like I'm in changing of gears right now, because obviously I've got some shouting to do. No, I'm not going to be shouting at you at all. So if it's a slightly kind of more meandering, no, Lord set me on fire. Amen. I'm continuing in our series in 1 John called Power of the Gospel this morning. And the drive of this series is that we as the people of God grow in confidence in the power of the gospel. Talked about it last year, just this sense of, do we know what we've been given? Do we know what we've been given? That's why communion's so important. It's why coming together to worship is so important, because in these moments, it's like we're not individuals, we are God's people. This is the people of God here today, and we unite around the power of Jesus on the cross. And that's what we remember in communion, isn't it? I love the words that Gareth shared with us, and I just love the opportunity to reflect and to sit there and be like, oh yeah, God, I rush through this life. I'm on this conveyor belt sometimes, and I just need to stop. In that moment, I don't know about you, but I was like, oh, the peace of God. And Lord, I bring my soul before you. Wash it. Wash me. Purify me that I might be clean. The goal of this series as well was really about, and I spoke about this last time I was with us, about freedom. It's like to be free. That's what the gospel gives us, freedom. And the danger is that when I'm talking, sometimes it's like, oh, no, it's about these rules and regulations. No, it's not. It's like God says, this is the best way to live. I want you to live in it. Do this and you'll be free. And so that's the goal of what I'm talking about. So let's jump in. 1 John 2, starting in verse 3. Says this: we know that we've come to know him if we keep his commands. Whoever says, I know him, but does not do what he commands is a liar, and the truth is not in that person. But if anyone obeys his word, love for God is truly made complete in them. This is how we know we're in him. Whoever claims to live in him must live as Jesus did. Verse 5, but if anyone obeys his word, love for God is truly made complete in them. There is something about living in the way of God that again comes back to being free. This verse 6 here, whoever claims to live in him must live as Jesus did, is a central strand of our discipleship strategy, or framework might be a better word, here in the church. And it's my title for today. It's called Live Like Jesus. Last time I spoke about how the whole of 1 John, the whole of this book, is supporting the incarnation, incarnate in flesh, which is that Jesus came to earth as a real human being, flesh and blood, that Jesus was flesh and blood. And that in doing so, he set us a model. And I think that this passage is so, you can look at it in two ways, but for me it's hopeful. Because in it, we can change. That there is this belief that we can continue to change, that change is possible. How? By becoming more like Jesus. I think one of the depressing things in life is when you meet somebody and they don't change. It's like, wow, you're really annoying. I'm talking about myself now. If Jen was here, she'd be like, yeah, that's you, James. No, but do you know, and I've said this before, I deeply, deeply don't want to live the same year on repeat. Which is, by that I mean, I make the same mistakes every year that I made the year before. John Wimber, founder of the Vineyard, says, I want to grow up before I grow old. And really he's saying is that there's got to be this process of transformation. Wouldn't it be incredible if this group of people, the people of God, were the people that changed most? Like, rather than people come to church, like, oh, they never changed either, they're exactly the same. It's like, no, How do they change? They become more like Jesus. They look more like Jesus. They reflect his nature and his kindness. So how do we become more like him? How do we embrace the lifestyle of a disciple? Because as Christians, Jesus is our example. The Gospels show us how he lived. And the deeper question that I think that we need to be asking is this: who am I becoming? Who am I becoming? As a disciple, your goal isn't just to know about Jesus. And I think probably if you've been around the church for any length of time, there will have been sometimes you've sat in a Bible study and it's like, well, I know more than you do. It's like, oh, come on. This isn't just about the knowledge of how clever you are. It's like, ultimately, I want to know, are you changing? Are you looking more like him? 1 John 2 verse 6 says this: this is how we know that we are in him. This is how you know that you are a disciple. Whoever claims to live in him must live as Jesus did. I called to follow him, to become like him, to do what he would do if he were us. So if Jesus lived our life, in our situation, in our job, in the place that you live, what would he do? Each moment of each day, what decision would he make? Well, I tell you what, he would make the best decision. So if he knows the best decision, then sometimes we just need to slow down. We need to ask the Lord, what would you do? If you were me right now, knowing everything about my life, which he already does, what would you advise? Sometimes it's just the best thing that we can do. One of the things that I get to do once a month is I have a spiritual director. It sounds very fancy, but really it's just somebody that helps you process and meet with God, like a guide in the Holy Spirit. Often when I start, I spend the first 5 or 10 minutes and I just sit there because I actually have to just still myself before I can begin to meet with God. I don't know about you, but often my mind is racing and racing and racing. It's like, I've got to do this, I've got to do that, I've got to finish this, I've got to sort this. And it can take me 10 minutes to literally stop worrying. and then I sit there and I'm like, oh, Lord, what do you want to say? And this last week, he literally, there were 2 things he said. He was like, come and follow me. It's like, oh, I thought I already did. That was the first thing. And then the second thing was Mary and Martha. I was like, oh, what's that? So then my spiritual director led me. It's kind of like in a moment where you imagine yourself in the story of Mary and Martha. You know, it's like, where are you in the room? Jesus is there. There's Mary. Where's Martha? And it's like a creative way of meeting Jesus. And the question is, where are you in the picture? I was like, I'm not even in the room. I'm down the road knocking on the door, trying to sort something out. Now, I share that with you but just, I guess, to say, I want to be in the room. I don't want to be down the road trying to sort something out. I want to be in the room with Jesus. And it was just a moment of, oh, Lord, I've got to slow down enough to be present to you. And then just that second phrase is, come and follow me. It's like, yeah, that is the desire of, that is the intention, the direction of every disciple of Jesus. Come and follow me. And do you know what? It's not this one-time moment that we come to faith, we fall into the kingdom, and we start following him, and then it doesn't. It requires every moment of every day that I choose to surrender my will. I choose to surrender my desires. I choose to bring all that I am before the Lord, and I say, I'm yours. What are we doing when we're worshiping? Often, there's a battle going on. There's a battle going. Worship is a battlefield. It's not something beige. And what I mean by that, wasn't that a lovely set that you guys put together this morning? It's like, no, flipping heck. This is the serious business of heaven that we're doing. We are battling in that moment. It's like, Lord, I've got to surrender, and I bring myself before the King of Kings. You are on the throne. I'm putting you back on the throne. I'm saying that you're in charge. There is no other. The darling of heaven crucified. Oh, Lord, I'm remembering what you did on the cross. Why? Because I've probably been distracted. because I've been away. And yes, we get to worship all of the time, but there is something about the rhythms that we put into our life that hold us in discipleship. I was reflecting just as I was driving over. I think one of the hardest things in our culture is that the rhythms that we have as the people of God aren't strong enough for the container of the world. And what I mean by that is, it's great to meet together for an hour and a half and all of those things. It's a great rhythm. But the danger is if we're only here every other week, and then we don't quite make it to small group, and then we don't quite manage to do our quiet time. Suddenly we look back and we're like, man, I've spent a whole month. Where's the formation? Who am I becoming? And am I in step with the Spirit? I'm not putting that on you in any deeply confrontational world. I'm just saying, what kind of rhythms do we need as God's people to hold ourselves to become more like Jesus? That's what I'm saying. The vision is to look like him. I'm just going to read a couple of the invitations. Mark 1:16-20. It's just as Jesus walked beside the Sea of Galilee, he saw Simon and his brother Andrew casting a net into the lake, for they were fishermen. Come, follow me, Jesus said, and I will send you to fish for people. At once they left their nets and followed him. Mark 2:13-14, once again, Jesus went out beside the lake. A large crowd came to him and he began to teach them. And as he walked along, he saw Levi, son of Alphaeus, sitting at the tax collector's booth. Follow me, Jesus told him, and Levi got up and followed him. Mark 8:34, then he called the crowd to him along with his disciples and said, whoever wants to be my disciple must deny themselves, take up their cross and follow me. There's a pattern, there's an invitation. Come and follow me. Come and be my disciple. And that is the invitation that every single one of us has again today. Take up our cross and follow him. Come to me. Wherever you're at, wherever you've been in the last week, wherever your mind's been, come, sit at my feet. I think the challenge sometimes with discipleship, that word, is, well, what are we even talking about? What do we mean? People often think about the what do I need to do and not the who. Who am I following? Who am I following? If we want to become more like him, we have to spend more time looking at him. Fix your eyes upon Jesus, look full in his wonderful face, and the things of the earth will grow strangely dim in the light of his glory and grace. We might even use the word discipleship slightly differently depending on our background, where we've come from. For some of you newer to faith, others of you have been in the faith a little longer. But for some, they're like, well, discipleship means one-on-one Bible study. For others, it's an accountability group. Others, it's worship services. Or for others, even it's lone activity. It's just me and Jesus. And that word discipleship has got loads of different expectations, but what do we really mean by the word discipleship? And the concept that I find most helpful is from Dallas Willard in his book, The Divine Conspiracy. If you're looking for something to uproot your life, that book, apart from the Bible, which will do even more, is deep. It's really good. It took me about 2 years to read it. I tell you why, because it's one of those that you have to read a chapter and then you're like, I'm just going to sit on it for a couple of months. Because what does it really mean? But the Divine Conspiracy, and in it he talks about being apprentices of Jesus. And sometimes in our culture, when we talk about apprentices, we're thinking 16 to 20-year-olds. Like, oh yeah, I get an apprenticeship. But really an apprenticeship is to learn under someone, is to learn on the job. John Mark Comer, somebody actually mentioned him on the way in, has taken this teaching and expanded, and just this little next bit's actually, it's kind of some of his thinking on this. But he says, if we look at Jesus, to start with, Jesus was a rabbi, which in Hebrew means a teacher. And of course he was more than that. He was the Messiah. He was God with skin on. But we know he's a lot more than just a teacher. But if you'd have been a first century Jew, and Jesus arrived in your town and in your synagogue one morning, the odds are the category that you would have put him in was that of a rabbi. And like every rabbi in his day, Jesus had two things. The first one was that he had a yoke, not a literal yoke. He was a teacher, not a farmer. And we don't use this word very often nowadays. But a yoke was like a wooden crosspiece that's fastened over the neck of two animals and attached to the plough or cart that they're pulling, keeping them in step and teaching them. So in terms of the yoke of a rabbi was their set of teachings or their way of living, walking alongside them. And so a yoke was a way of understanding how a rabbi would have read the Torah. But it was also their set of teachings on how to be human, their way to deal with life in all of its complexity: marriage, divorce, prayer, money, sex, conflict, resolution, government, all of it. And it's a bit of an odd image for us today. But what made Jesus unique wasn't that he had a yoke, because all rabbis had a yoke. It was that he had an easy yoke. It's like, oh, rabbis of the day would have had a yoke. So that was the first thing about the yoke. It was his teachings. And then secondly, that Jesus had apprentices. In Hebrew, the word is talmidim. And it's usually translated as disciples, which we're incredibly familiar with today. But sometimes we forget a bit of the meaning of that. To be one of Jesus's talmidim is to apprentice under Jesus. Put simply, it's to organize your life around these three basic goals. The first one is to be with Jesus, to be with him. The second one is to become like Jesus. And then the third one is to do what he would do if he were you. So we can't begin to outwork the life of the disciple if we do not be with Jesus. It's the beginning point. It's like we have to find a way in the craziness of this world to be with him. Now, for every single one of us, we are really different. And I love the uniqueness that God gave us. It doesn't really matter how you do it. It does matter that you do it. So how are you going to be? So for some people, do you know what? They love nothing more than going and spending a couple of hours and walk. My wife, Jen, last Thursday was like, I'm going to walk up a mountain. I was like, you're absolutely crazy by herself. She was like, I can't find anybody to go. So she went on a 9-mile walk up a mountain. I was like, can you just send me where you're going, just so I know? For her, she's like, that's my spiritual direction. It's where I go up the mountain and Jesus, I've got my director. It's called the Holy Spirit. And she comes back, having met with the Lord, like Moses up the mountain. For others of you, you're more corporate in the way that you'd want to do something, and you'd love to be in a prayer meeting, and it doesn't really matter. I think what I'm trying to say, it just does matter that you do it. Be with Jesus. You can't become more like him unless you're being with him. Be with him, the outworking of which is you begin to look more like him. And then you begin to bring every part of your life, every decision that you go through the day is like, what would Jesus do? If he were me, what would Jesus do? Can you see how fundamentally that would transform you if you begin to think like that? It's just a whole way of thinking. This is how our souls come to life. I'm going to crack on in the verses 7 to 10. It says this. Dear friends, I'm not writing you a new command, but an old one, which you've had since the beginning. The old command is the message you've heard, yet I'm writing you a new command. Its truth is seen in him and in you, because the darkness is passing and the true light is already shining. Anyone who claims to be in the light, but hates a brother or sister is still in the darkness. Anyone who loves their brother and sister lives in the light, and there is nothing in them to make them stumble. But anyone who hates a brother or sister is in the darkness and walks around in the darkness. They do not know where they are going because the darkness has blinded them. I actually touched a little bit on this in my first talk. Actually, I think I preached last week in Central. Let me give you the example. Last week I sat down before I was going to preach in Central. And I just spent 15 minutes with Jesus before I was going to go to the service, because I just need to get a bit of Lord, fill me. Just thinking, and I asked, and I was like, Lord, search me and know me. Unfortunately, he did. And I thought me and Jesus were good. Like, do you know what I mean? I thought we were on good form. And he said to me, you got to forgive someone. I was like, I didn't know that I had no awareness that I had unforgiveness in my heart towards somebody until I sat before Jesus. And he said, you've got to forgive somebody. I didn't know it was there. How often is that the case with unforgiveness? That would be like, I'm fine. It's like, oh no, I've got something. So it was really practical. Sometimes when we get in the presence of Jesus, he's like, forgive that person. And forgiveness doesn't necessarily is not something that just happens one-off moment, right, they're forgiven. It's something that you choose to lean into. Actually, I don't think it was a super big thing in my life. I just hadn't realized it was there. And then I got the opportunity to just cut that off. So when it's saying, if there's unforgiveness in your heart, do you know why? Because that leads to a lack of freedom. It leads to you being bound. Unforgiveness is horrible. It's like a cancer in the soul. And it eats us alive, and we might not even know it's there until we bring it into the light. The whole of these 2 chapters are out. Be in the light as he is in the light, so that you can shine like the stars in the heavens. It's like, come into the light. Now, I'm not going to dive particularly into this. It's giving you an imagery of something that will stop your relationship with God. It's like a really practical outworking, isn't it, of live like Jesus. Let me give you an example of what living in the light looks like. If you have unforgiveness towards a brother or sister, bang. I want to give you a few questions instead. I was talking with a lady called Claire Spears, who some of you will know is in our church, and she heads up prayer and spiritual formation. She is wonderful. And she was just talking that she'd been with our leadership college this week, and they'd had a series of questions because the first 3 days, I think, of the leadership college are all about looking at your soul. So it's like, before you can lead well, you have to understand who you are and what you're carrying, good and bad. Do you know what I mean? It's like the identity that God's put on you, how he's made you. But sometimes you have to begin to unearth the stuff that's in your life that's holding you back. Soul work. And she shared with me these 10 questions, and I thought, well, they're awesome. So I thought I'd share them with you because, again, we've got to get to the point of reflection before Jesus. These are great discipleship questions. I hope they'll come up. Okay, here you go. Number 1, let's just go through the 10. You might want to write them down because they're really good. Rather than be like, oh, they're interesting questions, it's like, no, I'd love you to ask them to yourself. Number 1, is everything okay in your heart? Or another way of putting it is, how is my soul? What's going on at the deepest level? Number 2, are you mad at anybody? Number 3, are you waiting around for someone to come to you and make things right? Number 4, have you had any extended imaginary conversations with anybody lately? And what that means is, are you having a rant at somebody but they don't know about? Feel free to look at your spouse. I'm sure there's something there. Number 5, do things come out of your mouth lately that you wish you could take back and wonder where did they come from? Isn't that a great question? Sometimes when we react to something, what is it that's the thing behind the thing? Like, why have I just responded to you in a way over the top? Can you pass this? Can you do this? Why do you always ask? It's like, what is it that's going on? Number 6, have you secretly celebrated someone's failure in the last week? Oh, I'm so pleased they've absolutely crashed. That's not a great thing, is it? Like, let's just be honest. Number 7, have you got any secrets eating at you? Number 8, is anything going on in you that you hope nobody discovers? Number 9, is there a question you hope nobody will ask you? Number 10, have you lied recently to someone you love? At this point, I'm like, there's 300 questions. No, there's only 10 questions. Do you see how good those questions are at exposing the real things going on in our hearts? That's why I like them, because I was like, there's nowhere to go with them, as in, have you lied recently to somebody you love? Okay, let's just take that. Why? What is it that's going on that's made you lie? Do you know what? It's one thing to read a set of questions. It's another to meditate on them before the Lord. So again, I know that I'm just sharing stuff. I would just really encourage you with these questions, that I think they're the kind of thing, if you were to go through these once a month, it's a way of checking your soul. It's like, how is my soul? Do a soul check. The goal of discipleship again is what? Freedom. Freedom to be more like Jesus, freedom to walk in his ways, freedom to live in the light, freedom to be transformed at the deepest level of my being. You have to, if you want to grow and change and be transformed, you have to reflect. You can't just keep, people that just keep plowing through life and they never sit and they're like, let's just think about what's happening here. Why this reaction? Why did I behave like that? Why did I shout at that person? Why did I lie? They're all good things. If I was to put this point, my first point was live like Jesus, that's the framework of what I'm talking about today. The second would be strengthen your soul. This is just a way of, Jesus is like, here's the example. Continue to strengthen your soul, strengthen your soul. And then I'm coming in to finish. Reasons for writing, verses 12 and 13, 14. I'll go down to 17. I'm writing to you, dear children, because your sins are being forgiven on account of his name. I'm writing to you, fathers, because you know him who is from the beginning. I'm writing to you, young men, because you have overcome the evil one. I write to you, dear children, because you know the Father. I write to you, fathers, because you know him who is from the beginning. I write to you, young men, because you are strong and the word of God lives in you and you have overcome the evil one. Isn't that a brilliant, just strengthening passage? Strengthen your soul. And then just finishing in verses 15 to 17, which you could have a whole year's worth of talks on, but just to touch on them. Do not love the world or anything in the world. If anyone loves the world, love of the Father is not in them. For everything in the world, the lust of the flesh, the lust of the eyes, and the pride of life, comes not from the Father, but from the world. The world and its desires pass away, but whoever does the will of God lives forever. Okay, we're talking about what it means to live in the gospel. Me and Jen, I bring Jen a cup of tea. We had a little sit in bed this morning before we started the day. And she was like, what are you preaching on? I was like, something brilliant. And I just briefly spoke it through and I was like, I'm just so challenged by this last passage in terms of the world wants to consume us. That's what it feels like. That's what it feels like to me. It wants to devour us. And there's something in here, and me and Jen just had this chat for about 10 minutes this morning where I was like, if people could understand these verses 15 to 17, so many of the Christian discipleship issues would change. What I mean by that is, if we understand that we are living in the light of eternity, it changes the way that you relate to this world. So what it's saying throughout this passage, in order to live like Jesus, we have got to look at the world in the right way. We have to understand where it fits in with God's plan. Otherwise, it will consume us. And the way to understand the term world in the Bible, as it's used here in this passage, do not love the world or anything in the world, because it sounds really harsh, doesn't it? It's like, what it's talking about is that the world is a value system or a mindset that makes the world all that we have. It's a value system or a mindset that looks at the material world and acts as if this is the only thing that there is, that this is finite. When we come back into the whole Christian story, we are talking about behind the material world is the spiritual world. I believe, and then that's why I said there's a battle going on in worship. Why? Because there's a spiritual battle going on. Our battle isn't against flesh and blood, but against principalities and powers of this dark world. So you've got the material world, you've then got the spiritual world, and then one step further on and you've got eternity. You've got going to be with Jesus. So many of our discipleship problems are because we have not understood that the world is not all there is. It's just not, this is not it. Jen loves to say this is but the breath. This is but the breath. And when you see the world from the perspective of eternity, realizing that the world is good, that God loved it enough to create it, and he loves it enough to redeem it. When we see that from the perspective of eternity, then this world, this body, this material world doesn't become ultimate, it becomes secondary. It's just secondary. All of these things are secondary. Money, your body, sex, work, the visible, secondary. It's all secondary. We have taken something that was meant to be good and we have made it ultimate. It's not ultimate. God is ultimate. I'm going to give you 2 more minutes and then I'm going to finish. It says these phrases that are so strong. For everything that's in the world, the lusts of the flesh, the lusts of the eye, and the pride of life. 3 things there. Lusts of the flesh, probably sex, pleasure, leisure, eating and drinking. Do you know what I mean? Again, sex is a brilliant example of something that is good, but it's just a signpost of heaven. It's a signpost of what intimacy with God looks like. Intimacy with God is so much greater, and it's not that that's bad. We shouldn't underplay it. It's good, but compared to living with the Lord for eternity, it is nothing. And what it's trying to do is it's just reframing. Realize this is good, it's just not as good as you think it is. So the lust of the flesh, the lust of the eyes, this has to do with appearance. How do you look? How you appear? Materialism, money. The need and desire in our culture, it's money, 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 money. One throwaway thing on this is how you use your money is a good test of where your heart is and what you think about this world. Because if you think that this world is it, the way that you use money will be just for you. Ultimately, it's been given to you for you to have every good thing. When you understand that it's all his and it's to be used in the light of eternity, you will use your money completely different. And then finally, the pride of life. And that's really the idea of the desire for recognition, applause, status, and advantage in life. Pride, again, I use this analogy, it's like the cancer that infects. Pride, do you know what, I'm going to go it my own way. I'm in control. If we've looked at anything in the world in the last year, is that we are deeply not in control. COVID, what's going on in the world, I just want to pray for the situation in Israel and Gaza. I don't know about you, but I'm like, that's scary. We're not in control. It's the Lord's. It's his world. But we're living in the light of eternity.